Okay, welcome back, everyone. This afternoon we are going to be talking about implementation. This panel worked together yesterday and worked together very well, but I've spoken with each of them and I'm trying to push them a little bit to talk more about action. We've heard a lot about interpretation and the stuff about relationship and the historical aspects of the Douglas treaties and other pre-Confederation treaties. But I think that people are, from those of you that I've spoken with, are pretty hungry for action. Yeah. So I've asked each of the panel members if they might insert some action words into their talks. So we're going to start off with Dr. Jim Miller.
Thank you, Maxine. I would like to thank the Namath First Nation and Vancouver Island University for organizing the conference, and thank Chief Doug White and Dr. Ralph Nielsen for the invitation to participate. I'd like to talk about what experience in other parts of the country can tell us in terms of what the problems have been with implementation here in the Douglas or Vancouver Island treaties area. Historical experience in Canada suggests that implementation of a treaty goes only as well as the state of the relationship between the treaty parties. Certainly, as Cole Harris has explained in Making Native Space, the experiences of the First Nations who were party to the Vancouver Island treaties, the 1850s, indicate that having the agreements respected in subsequent decades has been a major problem. Events in other parts of the country also illustrate that treaty-making challenges do not end when the agreement is concluded. As the James Bay Cree and Inuit, for example, found after negotiation of their landmark 1975 James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, it was one thing to agree and another to act. Billy Diamond, the chief negotiator of the 1975 treaty, later remarked, quote, "What the Crees and Inuits have learned over the last 11 years is negotiation of a claim settlement is only half the battle, and implementation is the other half," end quote. 3 years after Diamond's lament, the Indigenous parties launched litigation seeking compensation for the unkept promises. They also applied public relations pressure through the 1990s, organizing American environmental groups to lobby power utilities not to purchase power from Hydro-Quebec. That might be an example of something in terms of action taken locally. Finally, in 2007, 32 years after the agreement was concluded, the federal government and the James Bay Cree reached an out-of-court settlement that required Ottawa to pay the First Nation $1.5 billion in compensation and to agree to facilitate the development of Aboriginal self-government in the James Bay region. Not all struggles over treaty implementation in Canadian history have been so difficult or ended so well for the First Nations involved. Certainly, the experience of BC First Nations with the treaties concluded in the 1850-54 period has been much less fruitful. If we look to historical experience elsewhere for clues to reasons for the difficulties that the Vancouver Island treaties have encountered, it is well to keep in mind the theme of this conference. Its subtitle is Fulfilling Treaty Promises and Living in Treaty Relationships. This is an apt description of the general problem of implementation. Treaties are only as good as their implementation, and implementation is highly dependent on the state of the treaty relationships. The reasons why this is so can be divided into two, specific and more general. Specifically, one of the greatest problems with treaty implementation has been the cultural gulf between First Nations and the governments that were dominated by non-natives after treaties were made. Probably the clearest example of the problems that stem from cultural incomprehension is the clash between oral and written or government versions of the treaty. This audience will be familiar with the problem, but apparently governments and many Canadians are not, because they continue to insist that the written version of a treaty, that is, the version that was written down by government representatives, is the only valid embodiment of the agreement between the parties. But this makes no sense historically or in terms of simple fairness. And certainly doesn't make much sense in the case of the 1854 agreement, for which the written version is almost completely blank. Until well into the 20th century, the Aboriginal peoples who were party to treaties with the Crown were primarily people with oral accounts. They kept their records that way, or in some cases in the East, they also used devices such as wampum belts, seashells strung on deer intestine in patterns to serve as an archive of an agreement. First Nations in general throughout North America relied on oral history accounts of what had transpired. That was, after all, how they recorded history in their culture. The examples of the clash of oral and written accounts of treaty are so numerous that only a few can be mentioned. In both Treaty 1 and Treaty 2 of 1871, for example, the written version had no reference to Crown commitments to supply agricultural equipment, something the First Nations oral accounts clearly specified. The federal government refused to honor these outside promises, as it characterized them, until the First Nation parties began to refuse to accept their annuities. And the confrontation threatened to make concluding treaties with other Plains nations difficult or impossible. Only then, and only after the government realized that a written report of one of the treaty commissioners from 1871 did refer to commitments concerning agricultural support, did the federal government move to honor the promises. And even then it pretended that it was doing so, quote, out of good feeling to the Indians and as a matter of benevolence, end quote. Similarly, the Crown promises in the 1899 Treaty 8 negotiations not to levy taxes on the First Nations involved or conscript them for the military did not appear in the government's written version and were not always honored. This had occurred even though the written report of the Crown negotiators explicitly stated that such promises had been made. In 2003, the Federal Court of Appeal overturned an earlier decision in favor of the First Nations that was based on oral history, and the Court of Appeal ruled that way on the grounds that the trial judge had not been sufficiently careful to determine the validity of the oral evidence. Finally, in the James Bay Treaty, or Treaty 9 in Northern Ontario in 1905, recent research, some of it unpublished, has shown conclusively there was a wide gulf between both the written text of the treaty and the published treaty and commissioners' accounts. Moreover, that recent research indicates that the discrepancy between oral and written always worked to the disadvantage of the First Nations. While the cultural gap between First Nations and governments and courts, dominated by non-natives, is obviously a factor in explaining why treaty implementation has often been so problematic, it is not a sufficient explanation in and of itself. After all, treaty negotiators had often learned enough of Aboriginal protocol to carry out treaty making when their governments were sufficiently motivated to seek agreements. There is more to the explanation than simple cultural deafness. To a considerable extent, the cultural incomprehension and a general reluctance to implement treaties as negotiated were both the product of a profound change in the relationship between the Crown and Aboriginal parties that made the treaties. After treaty, the relationship deteriorated, leading governments to be less sympathetic to and cooperative with Indigenous groups with whom they had made agreements. While many regions and phases of treaty making could be cited to illustrate how the problem developed after treaties were made, perhaps the instance that is closest to the Vancouver Island experience is the pre-Confederation Upper Canadian treaties. Treaty making in the future Ontario went through three phases between the 1780s and the 1860s, as the region evolved economically from a sparsely inhabited hunting-gathering territory through the rapid development of a settled agrarian non-native population to the beginnings of a new resource focus. In parallel, treaty making went through three stages, with a group of treaties made by the Mississauga and Anishinaabe people and the Crown between 1784 and the War of 1812. A second following the war and before the formation of the Province of Canada in 1840. And finally, a pair of treaties with the Northern Ojibwa in Ottawa in 1850 and another treaty in 1862 in the north. To some extent, this pattern is similar to that on Vancouver Island, where the native-newcomer relationship began amidst a commercial economy and evolved towards a more settled society and the leading edge of a new mineral-focused activity. In Upper Canada, with each stage of the evolution, both treaty making and treaty implementation became more difficult and plagued with problems. In the first decades down to the early years of the 19th century, Crown representatives made treaties easily with First Nations negotiators who were often eager to accommodate what they were told their great father, as they referred to the Crown, desired. Although there were minor deviations, by and large the early treaties adhered to the formula for treaty making that the Royal Proclamation of 1763 had spelled out. Moreover, this early phase was distinguished by the frequency and ease with which the Crown representatives participated in the traditional Aboriginal protocols, speeches using rhetoric of family, gift-giving, and feasting. The traditional protocols that were used to establish the fictive kinship relations that were essential to harmonious relations with First Nations. It was also noteworthy that in this halcyon early phase, the Crown's principal representative, the governor, responded in 1797 to Mississauga complaints that settlers were encroaching on their fishing sites with a proclamation that began, quote, "Whereas many heavy and grievous complaints have of late been made by the Mississauga Indians of depredations committed by some of His Majesty's subjects and others upon their fisheries and burial places," and so on and so forth. The proclamation promised to act, quote, "with the utmost severity," end quote, against perpetrators. Even prior to the end of this first phase, however, there was evidence that the relationship was starting to fray. The Mississauga, who entered the head of the Lake Treaty at the beginning of the 1800s, insisted that the locations of their fishing sites be specified. And in 1811, another group east of the future Toronto requested that some of their fields be reserved for their use and said they, quote, "wish you would give us a writing to show these people that they may be sent off," referring to interlopers and squatters. After the War of 1812, the same tendency towards deterioration in relations was evident. A major cause of the problem was the rapid increase in immigration, which saw the population of Upper Canada increase tenfold by 1851, swamping the Indigenous population. In the treaty negotiations that occurred in this period, the Euro-Canadian record indicates that the use of Aboriginal rhetoric and protocol was much less frequent on the Crown's part. The government now characterized the agreements as indentures and substituted annuities for the one-time upfront payments that had been used earlier, because smaller annual payments would be less burdensome for the Crown. And differences in how the First Nations and Crown negotiators remembered what had been agreed upon began to crop up. In the final phase of Upper Canadian treaty implementation, the conclusion of the Robinson Treaties in 1850 and the Manitoulin Island Treaty of 1862, evidence of deterioration was even stronger than it had been. In both these cases, the prelude to negotiations was action by the settler society and its government that clearly violated the provisions of the Royal Proclamation of 1763. In the case of the 1850 Robinson-Huron and Robinson-Superior treaties in the future Ontario's near north, the colonial government licensed mineral exploration that triggered First Nations resistance that then led to treaty negotiations. That's not the way the proclamation envisaged it happening. With Manitoulin Island in 1862, the background to negotiation was non-natives' encroachment on First Nation people's fisheries. Again, not what the proclamation expected. And in the negotiations in 1850 and 1862, there was almost no Aboriginal rhetoric and ceremony on the part of the Crown. The old relationship that had originated in commercial and diplomatic interchanges was now completely gone because a settler society had become implanted. Treaty implementation and enforcement were now major problem areas. What is one to conclude from this pattern of events? The likelihood is great that treaties between Aboriginal people and the Crown will become more difficult to implement and have honored if the relationship between the two societies, Indigenous and immigrant, is not founded on mutual benefit. In Upper Canada, as a commercial economy gave way to an agricultural one and the non-native population swelled, the old relationship of allies and equals frayed and gave way. This pattern seems reminiscent of what transpired with the Vancouver Island treaties. Unfortunately for First Nations, those agreements were concluded on the eve of the implementation of an agricultural and resource extractive economy dominated by non-native at a time when First Nations population plummeted because of disease. The settlers controlled the provincial government, which in turn represented their interests in dealings with First Nations. The relationship will only improve and treaty implementation proceed better if the parties rediscover a reason to rely on each other. First Nations have always recognized the necessity to coexist with non-natives, and they've acted accordingly across the country. And in the 21st century, when everyone is more concerned about burdens on the environment, Enbridge, anyone? Possible area of cooperation? Concerned about burdens on the environment, and the courts have armed Aboriginal peoples with effective tools such as the duty to consult, perhaps the relationship will improve. But that would be the future, not the history of treaty implementation. Thank you.
Jim, as you were speaking, who was the sovereign at the time? Was Queen Victoria?
Not for the first part. It would have been George III and then George IV.
Around the time of the Douglas Treaties, though?
1837, Victoria.
Okay, so the Douglas Treaties are around 1850, so that's Queen Victoria.
She's sovereign when the Douglas Treaty.
Okay, so I'm thinking, it's like Victoria Day's coming up. Well, no, it's got me thinking because about a month ago I wrote a little op-ed for the Times Colonist, and I'm thinking like I could write an op-ed for the Times Colonist about Victoria Day, and do people know what was going on at the time in the Douglas Treaties? And I'm just, I still am stuck in that action thing. You know, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm thinking like, what can I personally do? Empire Days, okay, yeah. Okay, I'm going to call Brian Tom up, and I'll see what other ideas come up as Brian speaks.
Thank you, Maxine. So it's funny being on this side of the microphone with the big floodlight coming down. I didn't clean my glasses this morning, and so really you're just a fog. I can't see a single soul. But saying that, I do want to start by acknowledging the chiefs and the councillors, the elders, our MLA, elected local government representatives, Mr. Justice, my colleagues, guests. And thank you all for being here in Snuneymuxw territory to think through some opportunities for implementing the pre-Confederation treaties on Vancouver Island. I am honored and humbled by the invitation from Chief White and President Nielsen to come and contribute to this important discussion. I'm a fairly new professor in anthropology at the University of Victoria. I've only been there 2 years. Prior to that, I worked for over 13 years in the BC treaty process, 10 of which were here on Vancouver Island with the Hul'qumi'num Treaty Group. And I've had the great fortune to spend a lot of time with elders and chiefs, leaders of the communities here on the island, thinking about these issues. And today, my talk will focus on what I see as one of the key challenges of implementing the Douglas Treaties today, and indeed of modern treaty day relationships, and this is the so-called overlapping claims. I've come today not with some prescriptive ideas for neatly resolving overlaps by drawing tidy territorial boundaries and neatly containing the treaty relationships in some kind of perfect cartography. Reflecting on the experiences I've shared with Coast Salish peoples who have both been trying to implement their Douglas treaties and for neighboring non-treaty communities to establish respectful treaty relationships, I have come to believe that treaty relationships that do not get mired in the language of overlaps can come from a fulsome recognition of Coast Salish self-determination. I will do some brainstorming today in the spirit of kicking off discussion about how respecting and recognizing Indigenous notions of citizenship and resource management could more fully realize these treaty relationships. However, I do come to this discussion feeling cautious about how powerful institutions of government and courts shape the expectations of the exercise of self-determination. These expectations, I feel, do much to contribute to the divisive language of overlapping claims which limit our potential to fully recognize Coast Salish people's visions of community, of customary law, and of future successes of their political and economic institutions. It's with this hope and caution that I offer you my few thoughts on implementing the Douglas Treaties. Though the detail of implementing the Douglas Treaties can be complex and multifaceted, at the core are two principles of honoring promises and respecting and recognizing self-determination. It's clear to many here that promises around the Crown's obligations in respect of the village sites and enclosed fields, which have been improperly surveyed, omitted, cut off in the colonial settlement of Vancouver Island, must be fulfilled. In the detail of that are more complex matters like unraveling the attendant water rights and other rights that must go with the Crown's promises in respect to those lands. And I hope that we've had good discussion over the last day and a half about these issues and hear more from my colleague. Today, however, the element I will focus on relates to implementing treaty relationships with respect to the Crown's commitment that these Coast Salish peoples will be at liberty to hunt over the unoccupied lands and to carry on fisheries as formerly. At the heart of this commitment, I believe, is an imperative to foster a treaty relationship that recognizes Coast Salish self-determination of matters such as how community is defined and how resource management decisions will be made as they relate to the ongoing cultural practices of hunting and fishing. Indigenous peoples involved in the treaty relationship, both those that are signatory to these treaties and those who neighbor them, must have the political and legal space to determine who they are as peoples, what community means in Indigenous terms, and how their society's exercise of their treaty rights will continue to be guided by these principles. Let me briefly illustrate these issues by highlighting some insights shared with me by elders of Island Hul'qumi'num communities. Elders I have worked with acknowledge that while food, in their words, was taken from all over, people from the host community could always ask, "Why are you here?" with the expectation of hearing about their genealogical connections, their good intentions, and appropriate local knowledge. Sharing food and sharing access to places for obtaining food has long been the Coast Salish moral standard for maintaining respectful rapport between neighbors and kin. Indeed, Justice Lambert in Bartleman found that it was, quote, traditional among Saanich people to cooperate across tribal and language divisions, sharing access to resources in one another's territories. Rights to hunt and fish at various locations flowed from family relationships, previous residency, and reciprocal intertribal and interfamily relationships. There's flexibility and agency within this social system where people identify not only as First Nation they are a member of, their band or their tribal affiliation, but also who their family is. And in this sense, community in the Coast Salish world can be understood as encompassing both extended kin networks and the villages or tribes that are now represented by the contemporary political bodies, like the First Nations. Both have a stake in decision-making about how hunting and other practices are conducted on the land, and both are essential to the successful functioning of society. The emphasis one puts on family ties may change over time. In marriages, adoptions, residency mobility, and other life event weave extended family networks throughout the Coast Salish world. This is not to say the Coast Salish world has long been an open area commons, far from it. But over time, people exercise an enormous resourcefulness to succeed in life through their choices of both where they live and how they activate their extended family network. Self-determining Coast Salish peoples have long accommodated this dynamic practice of citizenship. The state, however, demands a different vision of citizenship than this, requiring that individuals declare membership to only one Aboriginal community and belong to only one treaty. There's no dual citizenship, no double dipping. I've heard numerous individuals comment on the difficult position of having a parent or grandparent in a Douglas Treaty First Nation, while through life circumstance, they are a member of a non-Douglas Treaty band. Indeed, the late Chief of Cowichan, Dennis Alphonse, when talking with me about Douglas treaties, asked me to note for posterity that he himself is a Douglas Treaty descendant. His grandfather's roots are Lequamin, and his grandmother, through his great-grandmother, was from Tsayout. This never detracted from his strong position as being descended from a famous Cowichan ancestor and making a lifetime of contributions to his home community. However, he felt that government was denying his full heritage, limiting his life choices and those of his children. Drawing on well-known principles of Coast Salish bilateral kinship, people like the late Dennis Alphonse feel they shouldn't be forced to choose to have to be either treaty or non-treaty. They wish to be able to exercise their rights as descendant of multiple communities on a more flexible basis. Interestingly, there's no rules prohibiting membership in Coast Salish First Nations on either side of the Canada-US border. And indeed, I know several people who, in the traditionally cosmopolitan Coast Salish spirit, have exercised their options on both sides. In an era where band and tribal governments on both sides of the line are centralizing their authorities, this expanded vision of citizenship opens up important possibilities. So while this dynamic notion of citizenship creates flexibility, it's not completely open-ended. There have been serious concerns expressed by both governments and neighboring First Nations when individuals take food or involve themselves in land or resource management decisions far from their home communities without engaging in respectful relations with their extended family and neighbors. While this cuts both ways, individuals from Douglas Treaty communities, the example I'll give, have on occasion rationalized doing this without connecting to the family relations or territorial leaders by arguing they're exercising their Douglas Treaty right. When things get out of hand, like they did when some young men killed more elk than they could eat around Lake Cowichan about 10 years ago, as described in the recent R versus Morris et al. Decision of the BC Provincial Court, local opposition and resentment inevitably follows. Indeed, a friend of mine commented, "How far do they push their rights in our area, and how free are we to go into their territory and take their elk or deer or what have you?" These arguments give rise to the powerful critiques that governments are doing harm to non-treaty First Nations by giving those Douglas Treaty people rights. One person I spoke with resentfully said, "They come here day or night because of that treaty. The government defended their hunting rights, and so they infringe on our territory." This manner of engaging in treaty relationships, in my view, exceeds the expectation of normal protocols and territorial prerogatives. Indeed, the Justice Mackenzie's decision in R versus Morris et al., we see exactly this kind of dispute working its way through the courts, and its judges, instead of the Coast Salish political leaders and elders that are given the difficult task of sorting out what the extent and limits of the treaty relationship are. In taking this approach, we see a breaking down of the language of the responsibilities of extended family relations and an evoking of the divisive language of overlapping claims. The solution is in the recognition of Coast Salish self-determination on these matters and the continued enabling of the operation of Coast Salish customary law to both steward resources and resolve disputes. Contemporary Indigenous governments, for example, could work explicitly to recognize a land tenure system that included recognizing the role of family heads and knowledgeable stewards to make decisions, to guide young people, and to establish repercussions. This would not necessarily be to parcel out sub-territories or allotments to individuals or family. We well know from the modern-day treaty process of the difficulty of trying to draw lines between these closely related communities. Rather, it could be done through a process of codification, where First Nations have a system where families, contingent on some criteria of ancestral connection, register their interests and nominate key individuals who have a stewardship role for these places. First Nations could build in dispute resolution mechanisms appropriate to their communities, and the stewards of these places, who who are members of the First Nation whose core territory the site is would be key in making decisions about extended family and other neighbors' access. Agreements would need to be made for the seamless operation of this kind of system in areas like the Gulf Islands, where more than one contemporary First Nations has legitimate jurisdictional interests. Importantly, these jurisdictions and authorities must be recognized in communities throughout the Coast Salish world. So just a moment of conclusion here. There's a Coast Salish proverb that came to mind when I was thinking about this. Iathich esustitawatlich. And it means take care and respect each other, and you will help one another. And I think this is exactly the kind of insight that we need for governments and First Nations to be entering into these treaty relationships together. This is really the wisdom of implementation. Essential in the successful treaty relationship is the recognition of Indigenous priorities in social and political relationship, and the making of space by governments for these to continue to unfold in Indigenous terms. Government needs to be a supportive partner, recognizing how and when they are putting First Nations into objectionable overlapping positions and providing important resources to facilitate productive dialogue. At the root of treaty relationship, there must be a recognition of the ongoing operation of Indigenous law and cultural practice. To do so is to abandon the divisive language of overlaps and to more fully engage Coast Salish values of respectful sharing relations. Hai Tsapka, Needs Tai.
So this question of citizenship and self-determination for me, it reminds me, as Brian pointed out, the importance of using our law, our Indigenous law. And at the University of Victoria, we're talking about developing a law degree that is based on the idea that Canada is a multi-juridical country. I mean, we recognize the common law and the civil law, but there isn't a whole lot of recognition for Indigenous law. So we've been talking there about developing a program for that. But it's not just a program that happens at the university. I'm thinking, like, how does that work in our communities? And you know, we have a very strong potlatch system in our communities, and when you're there in the big house, or when I'm there in the big house, I can feel the power of that collectivity. But then we leave the big house, and I'm not feeling it so much. And I'm thinking we need to talk more and breathe more life into those laws, and make them more recognizable to even to people like me who I have a hard time seeing it sometimes. Justice Harry Slade is next, and we'll see what ideas he can spark for us.
Right. Thanks, Maxine. It really is a pleasure and a privilege to have participated in this, and it's really expanded my own kind of mind on around the whole discussion of treaty and Aboriginal rights. On a very personal note, it's been so wonderful to me to run into so many people that I had contact with in practice 20 years ago, and to see that despite slight changes in my appearance, I'm recognized. And I'll just mention two, they being Snuneymuxw, Doug White Sr. and James Johnny. I want to endorse Dr. Tom's view that internal protocols among the Douglas Treaty Nations and as between the Douglas Treaty Nations and their neighbors who are not treaty nations and protocols within communities that reveal traditional governance and traditional law is extremely important. One might think, well, this is not the way we did it before colonialism. But I think you have to keep in mind the destructive effects of the Indian Act on Indigenous governance, which in large measure, I believe, broke down many of those bonds. And to restore them, I would suggest demands thought and what I would call some measure of codification. But I'm going to talk about implementation perhaps on a different scale, and I'd preface my comments by saying that I'll focus on the means by which Indigenous concepts and man's relationship with the land and with each other may become a shared reality through processes in which all interested parties, all necessary parties to negotiation can have an empowered place at the table. In doing so, I don't mean to discount or reject the idea that social change is organic, growing in time and place, and new definitions of interests and rights need not depend entirely on a particular process with a particular outcome. Now, treaties made in the colonial period reveal the early formation of relationships between colonizers and Aboriginal nations. Unlike modern treaties, pre-Confederation treaties are rather sparse in their written terms, and it is those written terms that tend to inform the view of the other, and the other in this case being the non-Indigenous population. Now, the written words of a pre-Confederation treaty may very well and likely do not reflect or encompass all aspects of the meetings of minds of the signatories to a treaty, even if there was a meeting of minds. The terms of modern treaties reflect the demands for clarity in contemporary relationships of sharing and tend to articulate with precision the decision-making authorities of Aboriginal nations and other governments, and the means of an ongoing reconciliation of those authorities. Now, if it's accepted that greater precision serves all, how can it be achieved? And my presentation will offer a very brief overview of Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand processes for the contemporary definition of Aboriginal and treaty rights and their implementation. Now, what do we have in Canada? Federal processes, comprehensive claims policy. The primary thrust of this, created in 1973 and reaffirmed in 81, was to obtain certainty in respect of territorial ownership, use and management of lands and resources, and some aspects of governance. The policy evolved to address recognition and continuation of existing Aboriginal and historic treaty rights through modern land claims agreements. Under the government's 95 inherent rights policy, self-government arrangements may be negotiated simultaneously with lands and resources as part of comprehensive claims settlements. Now, the federal comprehensive claims process is based on government policy. Participation by Aboriginal nations, treaty or otherwise, Canada and the provinces is voluntary. There is within this process no independent entity empowered to bring the parties together, monitor the negotiations, or refer questions of law that may arise to the courts. The specific claims tribunal, well, it has an important but limited mandate. Compensation where there's been intrusion upon reserves, failure to create reserves, or breach of certain types of treaty promises. It does not have a mandate that goes to implementation of treaties in a way that would contribute to the definition of the contemporary relationship between the state and Aboriginal nations which entered pre-Confederation treaties. BC Treaty process. Now, this was established pursuant to recommendations of the BC Claims Task Force. The BC Treaty Commission was constituted as a keeper of the process. It assesses the readiness of Canada, BC, and First Nations to commence negotiations, facilitates and monitors negotiations, and allocates negotiation funding. It is not constituted with the authority to address issues that may arise over good faith in negotiations. It has no ability to compel mediation. It has no authority to refer specific questions to the courts. Participation in the process is voluntary for all parties. Though it's independent of government, the BC Treaty Commission has no power over the parties, and the parties are under no compulsion to consider any recommendations it may choose to make. The superior courts, as constituted in the provinces and territories, have jurisdiction over claims of Aboriginal and treaty rights. It's generally recognized that courts are not an ideal forum for the resolution of complex issues that arise over territories, resources, and governance. Courts at all levels have urged the negotiated resolution of these matters, and I refer to Delgamuukw, which characterized Section 35 of the Constitution Act as establishing a sound basis for negotiations and urged negotiations. I also mention Haida II, where an often overlooked part of it is the express anticipation that consultation and accommodation would take hold while Aboriginal nations and the other pursued larger and more comprehensive negotiated reconciliation. What has been done in other jurisdictions? Well, I'd first point to Australia. How is the table set for negotiations there? Well, following Mabo versus State of Queensland, a 1992 decision of the High Court, which recognized the existence of the law of Aboriginal title as part of the common law of Australia, as did Calder and far more recently Delgamuukw, two groundbreaking decisions concerning Aboriginal title in Canada. A year after the Mabo decision, the federal government in Australia passed the Native Title Act. This established the National Native Title Tribunal, which provided a process through which Indigenous Australians could lodge claims for recognition of the particular Aboriginal title of Maori peoples. That tribunal is independent in that it takes authority from the Native Title Act, not government policy. Keep in mind that policies tend to favor those who made them. Legislation can empower tribunals and, more importantly, empower the participants in the process administered by a tribunal. Roles and functions of the tribunal include mediating native title claims under the direction of the Federal Court of Australia, assisting to negotiate Indigenous land use agreements, and making arbitral decisions on whether some proposed activities or developments which attract the right to negotiate can proceed, such as the grant of mining titles. When a claim satisfies the criteria, its filing calls for state participation in negotiations. Its statutory powers confer the ability to establish the right of the Aboriginal collectivity to negotiate, require mediation, summons witnesses, and refer questions to the federal court. Now, what is the source of information that that tribunal takes into account? Prominent in that is oral history. Now, the courts continue to have a role in the process in Australia, administered by the Native Title Tribunal. When the terms of agreement are reached, they become incorporated into a judgment of the High Court. My paper sets out some of this in greater detail and some of it not at all. New Zealand, the Treaty of Waitangi. In New Zealand, Parliament enacted the Treaty of Waitangi Act, and that created the Waitangi Tribunal. Its powers extend to inquiring into and making recommendations upon any claim submitted to the tribunal. In exercising its functions, the tribunal shall have exclusive authority to determine the meaning and effect of the treaty as embodied in the treaty texts, and to decide issues raised by the difference between them. The texts are related in both the language of the Maori and the English language. The tribunal has powers to investigate and make recommendations for interim and permanent measures, including changes to proposed legislation that may be contrary to the principles of the treaty. It's a commission of inquiry with powers to conduct inquiries into claims. It can order the attendance of witnesses, production of documents, it can commission its own reports, it can refer the parties to mediation, and if agreement is not reached, make recommendations. I should mention that both tribunals, New Zealand and Australia, they have made recommendations, and I'm told by members of those tribunals that in every case, albeit sometimes with minor modifications, the recommendations are accepted. How do they get to their recommendations? They bring the necessary parties together, and they take traditional knowledge on an equal footing with other forms of history to formulate their recommendations. One of the many resulting agreements, and a list of them is in my paper up just to 2008, is an agreement reached between the Tarawa and the Crown in the Deed of Settlement 2012, and the paper outlines some of the major features of that. Now, is this the end of the story? Are the terms of these deeds of settlement immutable, final, and incapable of further development? No. They constitute a final and comprehensive settlement of matters arising before September 1992. But though they're clear, the outcomes are not fixed in time and place and forever immutable. It's contemplated that the Maori of the particular iwi can pursue claims against the Crown for acts and omissions more recent, as well as claims based on the continued existence of Aboriginal title or customary rights. Now, I'll close with this. In Canada, we have something very, very unique in the world. Section 35 of the Constitution Act recognizes and affirms Aboriginal and treaty rights. This gives these rights constitutional force, part of the supreme law of Canada. So I ask the question, would an independent tribunal with the mandate and powers that we see in Australia and New Zealand provide a means to give effect as law to Aboriginal and treaty rights through a process of definition, through discussion. I should mention also that outcomes I would anticipate, have constitutional force. And given that, bring into play the concept of the Constitution as a living tree that grows and reaches out with new branches, reaches out with new roots to provide a dynamic foundation for the relationship that has been created by a modern land claims agreement, which would include a treaty where the much flesh is put on the bones. So thank you for your attention.
Really want to thank you, Maxine, and thank you to the previous speakers and everyone that's here gathered up. I want to begin just by expressing my real disappointment that Nick Claxton wasn't able to be with us today. He was originally scheduled to be on this panel to talk about his experiences growing up as someone from down in Saanich and his work with his family and his people in advancing treaty rights and implementing treaty rights in that context. I think that's a really important story that needs to be a part of the ongoing conversation, and I know that we'll find other opportunities in the future where he'll be able to share that. One of the most remarkable stories at the center of Douglas Treaty jurisprudence is the Claxton case, the Saanich and Bay Marina and Claxton decision, where there's a number of very important principles. First, the issue of jurisdiction and the implementation or the lack of opportunity or power of the provincial government to implement its jurisdiction in a way that would interfere with treaty rights, but also important principles about the relationship of treaty agreements protecting fisheries and how that extends beyond the mere act of fishing, but actually into the protecting the fishery itself, comprised of the waters and the subterranean lands. Subterranean? That's not subterranean. Lands below the water, the foreshore, that all part and parcel comprise the fisheries. And so it's quite an expansive decision that comes from the Tseo peoples. That's a very important marker, I think, in the development of jurisprudence. But I've got to tell you, implementation, this is the key purpose of bringing everyone together in this conference. Try to talk about and think about implementation. I know from our side what I believe is the work that we need to do from the Snuneymuxw people's perspective in terms of upholding and implementing our rights. But we're only one of the parties to the treaty. All Canadians have a part and a hand in implementing the treaty relationship that we all live within together. I think Dr. Jim Miller's, the title of Dr. Jim Miller's talk here from a couple months ago was "We Are All Treaty People." And that's a very simple yet very profound statement. That it's a statement that has it points to an important transition that is required for us to really start to go down that path of implementation together, to get on those railway tracks that Chief Wilton Littlechild was talking about together, to hold each other up in a new and a different way, is going to require some fundamental shifts in everyone's thinking. And so I wanted to talk. I'm going to take Maxine's prodding to talk more about action and share with you some of the basic things that I think about when I'm thinking about implementation of the treaty relationship. First and foremost, it's important to understand that the treaty relationship itself only makes sense in the context of multiple parties, of two different parties. That it's law, it's understanding, it's agreement that exists in a space between us, and it's meant to bind us, it's meant to direct us in how we're going to live together. For that relationship to be healthy, to be meaningful, to be mutually beneficial, we need to be equal partners in that. And to be equal partners, we need to be equally strong, equally clear about ourselves, about who we are as individual parties. And so as for example, the Chief and Council of Snuneymuxw, we've talked at length about the importance and the need for us, our governmental role in addition to the roles of families and individual Snuneymuxw raising up their children in a certain way, we recognize that to properly implement our treaty, our children need to know exactly who they are in the world. Who are the Snuneymuxw people? Who are the Snuneymuxw families? What is the Snuneymuxw people's relationship to the Creator and all of creation? One of the stories that I tell frequently when I'm trying to explain in a sort of simplified way the gaps that exist in terms of worldview and understandings and how it can be very difficult to resolve issues and disputes is I tell a story about fishing and fisheries. And I try to sort of illuminate the gap that I see from the approach of the Government of Canada and their interests in the commercial fisheries versus what's going on the Snuneymuxw side of the equation. And I tell a little story about the Snuneymuxw First Nations relationship with dog salmon on the Nanaimo River. And what is it that's going on? When we're fishing and when Canadians are fishing, are we doing the same things or not? And I think that from different worldview, it's clear that we're not. Primarily the main lens of the Canadian framework in relation to fisheries and the whole apparatus of DFO and all of that is primarily at, or at least it is for another, I'm not sure when the budget is going to be passed in terms of the fisheries habitat aspects of it, but the Fisheries Act is aimed at protecting fisheries habitat, maintaining, it's aimed at trying to ensure a productive and healthy commercial fishery. It's obviously not done a very good job of that. But those are the values that are there. Go out and you fish, we can see that they're commodities. We can generate wealth and value from that. So I talk about that being the sort of the primary framework from which Canada approaches that complex issue of fishing. And then I start to talk about what is it as a Snuneymuxw person to be fishing, in particular different species of fish. And I share the story of we have a ceremony that we undertake every year out at Jack's Point. It's actually a remarkable story. There's a big boulder out at Jack's Point which has engraved on it as petroglyphs a number of different species of salmon. We've been talking about anniversaries recently. Last month was the 30th anniversary of Section 35. Soon it will be the 50th anniversary of White and Bob and all these different things. Well, in 1967, it was the 100th anniversary of Canada. And the family that owned the land out at Jack's Point, it was no longer Snuneymuxw land, recognized by the Crown. There's a fee simple owner out at Jack's Point. They said, hey, we've got this rock out at Jack's Point that we would like to give to the city of Nanaimo to put in front of the museum to commemorate the 100th anniversary of our country. I didn't know that it had actually been picked up and moved by a barge, picked up by a crane, put on a barge and sent over to the museum. And I was out there looking for it one day, talking to my grandmother, who had participated in the ceremonies when she was a young woman. And Grandma, I spent the whole day walking up and down Jack's Point looking for the petroglyph. I could not find it. And she said, it's in that second little bay from the point. You should be able to find it quite easily. And the next week I happened to be going to the Nanaimo archives to look at documents, walking through the parking lot, and I get to the door, and I'm like, what the heck was that I just walked by? I go walking back, and there's this big boulder sitting in the parking lot of the Nanaimo Museum, and it's the Snuneymuxw petroglyph, where there's a certain kind of ritual and ceremony that's undertaken, and that ceremony is meant to show our respect and our recognition to the Creator and to those particular fish who are our relations. That that in a very real way, those fish are our family, and that it would be a disgrace and an utter disrespect for the Snuneymuxw to be sitting on the beach letting those fish go by without showing them recognition and respect. Because they're our family. Because it's the daughter of one of our chiefs from a long time ago, married into those people that are those fish today. And so I said, in that context, when we're starting to think of what's going on for the Snuneymuxw people when they're fishing versus what's going on for Canada, and when we're sitting together trying to figure out, is there any coherent possible discussion we can have to come to an understanding that would reflect a meaningful implementation of Douglas Treaty fisheries rights. And it's very difficult, very, very difficult. This is not going to be easy implementation, I know that much. But it is definitely, in my mind, it's a requirement to sit down and talk. Find the space to share the story that I just shared, the stories that you all have here in this room, together to put it into the mix and start to come up with those commonalities, come up with the common railway to go down together. That's the real, in my mind, the really important work in front of us. I know that, I think I've had the opportunity to talk a couple of times in this conference, and I've talked about the incredible strength of the Douglas Treaty rights, and I think that we've all had the opportunity to hear in numerous different ways that idea confirmed by many different speakers of the real significance of Douglas Treaty rights. And the rights themselves, the legal decisions, quite often come from a place of deep conflict. Certainly the legal process itself is a space of hyper-adversarialism. It's about getting in a room and fighting. And it's, no holds barred, gloves are off, notwithstanding all the niceties and formalities of lawyers and judges and all of that. It's a real fight. It's not nice, it's ugly. The national chief was sitting here yesterday morning opening up. He's the named litigant in the Ahousaht litigation about their claim to an Aboriginal title to the fisheries and an Aboriginal right to carry on their fisheries in a commercial context. He was put to his people, he is the Hatwiya, the chief of his people, the answer to their claim in the courts that they received from the federal government was to be put to the question. This is what the federal government said to the Ahousaht people. You know what? And now remember what I talked about yesterday morning when I talked about what Clifford White experienced when he stood up to assert and defend his treaty rights, the way that he was treated, being called a pig, the way that people said the treaty doesn't even exist. Well, Adenshut and his people, the first line of attack of the federal government was, you don't even exist as a people. The Ahousaht people are not an Indigenous people of Canada. Your job now, in the context of this adversarial court process, is to prove that there ever even was an Ahousaht people. There ever even was a Nuu-chah-nulth people. I don't know who you guys are today standing here in front of this court, but we, as the federal prosecutor in this litigation, speaking on behalf of the Crown, I say to you, the judge, that these people don't even exist. Never mind issues of capacity. Who's the proper title and rights holder? Who can stand up and defend this or that? Do you even exist as a people? And so it's important to keep in mind all of the litigation, all of the 50 years of jurisprudence that I talked about and that Tom Berger talked about last night, that really started for the first time to talk about the ideas of treaty rights and what did they mean in Canada, an Aboriginal title and Aboriginal rights. That quite often, I think Dr. Brian Tom was talking about the nature of the litigation and the capacity of people to assert rights or not assert rights. That more often than not, all of these decisions from Sparrow to White and Bob and Gladstone, these are all individual people that have been charged under some statute, whether federal or provincial, that are standing up to defend themselves. These are not nations. Quite often it had a nation of people standing there, but the lawyers were getting instructions from their clients who were people that were accused and charged of some statutory offense. So White and Bob was not, properly speaking, the Snuneymuxw people litigating the issues of the Snuneymuxw Treaty of 1854. It was Clifford White, standing up and using his lawyer, Thomas Berger, using the Douglas Treaty as a shield against the application of provincial law to protect the space for Snuneymuxw law to continue to operate. And so you can see this 50-year process in the courts of Aboriginal law clunking along, trying to create this interstitial body of law to create some kind of a coherent framework for our peoples the Indigenous peoples of Canada and the government of Canada, for provinces, to find a way to live together. Gosh, I'm still on my very first point. Point being, Maxine, I'll ask Maxine to get you all invigorated again in a moment. The point being that it's always important to understand a couple of things about treaty law, about Aboriginal law in Canada, that this is not Indigenous law. You know, when people in Canadian law schools, for example, say, oh, I'm taking a class on Aboriginal law. Well, they're taking a class about Canadian law about Aboriginal issues. What Maxine was talking about a degree in Indigenous law, is actually about the Indigenous law that we need to be teaching Snuneymuxw kids growing up, all of the Indigenous peoples across the country, to know about what we call our Snowayeth and you know, the sacred basic teachings of our people, about who we are, how we're meant to be as individuals, how we're meant to treat each other. All of that, you know, this continues to operate to this day. The name that I hold, Kwalasultan, came to me in an Indigenous legal framework in accordance with Snuneymuxw Snowayeth, you know, Coast Salish law, Snuneymuxw law. You know, I was married to my wife, notwithstanding what Grand Chief Conrad Siwi had to say this morning about I don't have multiple wives. I don't want to get into that argument today or that discussion today. That's for another time and place. But my wife Anissa and I, we were married in accordance with Coast Salish law, with the Swaikhui ceremony. The most sacred rituals and laws of the Coast Salish people. This is alive and well. You know, this issue of overlaps and whatnot becomes ugly and distorted because, in my mind, because we're looking at it through the lens of Aboriginal title instead of Indigenous title. And the original, you know, the 14 Douglas treaties that exist in BC were not the first treaties ever made in BC. You know, the Snuneymuxw and the Snuneymuxw, the Snuneymuxw and the Chemainus, the Snuneymuxw and the Musqueam. We've had treaties for eons, understandings amongst each other for many, many, many generations, hundreds of years. There's this framework of law between us that has always been there. So there's international dimensions to the law, and this is an important thing in terms of trying to understand this overlap issue. That we shouldn't be rushing to a Canadian court to determine overlaps. We shouldn't be rushing to third parties to determine overlaps. This is our business properly, to be determined in accordance with our own laws and relationships and treaties that we have with each other. That we shouldn't be acting in ways that harm each other. We talk about the Crown's duty to consult, but we have even deeper relations and obligations with each other as Indigenous peoples, that if we're undertaking activities that would impact upon our brothers and sisters, then we better be engaging with them about that and understanding that. So implementation, I think, needs to be, in terms of a strong treaty relationship, we need strength on both sides and both parties. And it's a lot of work on our side. I think Justice Slade talked about the incredible impact of the history of the last 150 years in this part of the world on our ability to properly stand here today, to properly stand here with the strength and clarity about who we are as individual nations, individual Indigenous peoples. So there's a lot of things to determine and sort out. You know, I was thinking about maybe I know I probably only have a couple of minutes left, so maybe because I do want to get to a conversation with you all. I wanted to share the complexity of implementing the land rights of the Snuneymuxw people in the context of the history of this part of the world. I want you to think about the theater that we're sitting in as Snuneymuxw territory. That each of the totality of Snuneymuxw territory is represented by us here, each of these seats. And I want you to think that what happened through the reservation process was that basically they took all of you and said, you all sit in this one chair right here, where Tiffany's sitting. All of you Snuneymuxw, get off all of this land, go sit here in one chair out of 300 chairs. That's your place to be. And then, you know, what are the remarkable stories of this part of the world has to do with first, the incredible wealth generated by Snuneymuxw coal to the Dunsmuir family, but also the promise that Canada made to British Columbia in their terms of union negotiations for British Columbia joining Confederation. One of the key terms was that Canada said, we will connect you with the rest of the country by rail. A remarkable coincidence with Chief Wilton Littlechild's metaphor about railways. They said, we will connect Vancouver Island and British Columbia to the rest of the country by rail. That's what the agreement was that in 1871. By the early 1880s, it still hadn't been fulfilled, and it became a very hot political topic of the day, and Canada looking around trying to figure out how are we going to actually fulfill this promise to British Columbia. On Vancouver Island, they looked and said, who here in this space has the necessary resources to build a railway in southeastern Vancouver Island? They looked at, the only person in the room was the Dunsmuir, a massive fortune. And they talked to Mr. Dunsmuir and they said, what if we give you about $1.5 million and southeastern Vancouver Island in fee simple? Do you think you could build a railway for us? He said, oh, are you kidding me? Of course. Absolutely, I'll do that. And what that meant, though, for not just for the Snuneymuxw, but for all of our relations on southeastern Vancouver Island, is that we're sitting here in Tiffany's chair, and the entirety of every other seat in this room has been handed over in fee simple to one individual and dispossessed, so it's no longer Crown land. And so today the Halkomelem Treaty Group is doing things that have been discussed here today. They've gone to an international forum, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, to raise that as an issue that needs some international comment about the problems with trying to achieve reconciliation in this part of British Columbia without dealing with this issue of the Dunsmuir land grant, the ENN land grant from the 1880s. So that's the sort of the big picture of today it's owned by Timber West and Island Timberlands. Timber West owns 20,000 hectares of our territory, and Island Timberlands owns another big chunk of it. But so that's up in the mountains, and in terms of when my people think about where's home, you have a place in your heart about where you belong, where your home is. For us, that's Departure Bay and downtown Nanaimo. Those are the two winter villages of the Snuneymuxw people. And for those of you that are not from here, those two places it's downtown Nanaimo, fully developed, and Departure Bay is similarly developed. So I ask myself, as the leader of the Snuneymuxw people, how could we possibly implement the land rights? The only reason Douglas came, the only reason there's a treaty from 1854 here is because James Douglas recognized the Aboriginal title of the Snuneymuxw people. There's absolutely no other reason for this treaty to exist. And so when he came and recognized the Aboriginal title of the places that we lived and the resources we depended upon, and then subsequent governments and decades later, everyone goes off in a different direction. 150 years later, implementing the land rights of the Snuneymuxw is a very complicated and difficult issue that we need to talk about and try to figure out. Because this little chair is not big enough for my people to even live on. We need to change that reality. The status quo is broken. We have the tools in the Treaty of 1854. If it's implemented in a good and strong way together by sitting down and talking about it together, then we have the mechanisms and the tools to address this ugly reality of Canada that has to be addressed if this country is ever going to be the great country that it can be. This country has unbelievable potential. It's got all of the basics and fundamentals to be a great country in the history of this earth, but it never will be until it addresses this fact, this outstanding issue of the relations between the Crown and Indigenous peoples across the land. And I know that it's everyone in this room that needs to have a voice. Everyone, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, lawyers, academics, parents, mothers, aunties, everyone has to participate in this discussion. This is my first view of implementation, is that we need to sit down together and sort this stuff out by being reasonable human beings talking to each other in recognition and respect. I will not leave this to another generation. We can't leave this to another generation of people, to my sons sitting there in the front row. I don't want them to have to deal with the same issues I'm dealing with. My job is to create a better life for them and for all of their peers, all of the children of all of the people sitting in this room. We see now the tools from, the everywhere from local relations all the way to the international arena. There are frameworks there for us to be guided by, to learn from. This issue is far too important to be left to the ugly reality of the hyper-adversarial reality of courts. There's no, that's not the right place to build that pathway together. It's by sitting down and working through these things together in recognition and respect. And it's going to be no simple matter. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require some changes, but it's going to be mutually beneficial. It's going to create a better space and a better society for all of us. So with that, I hope those were action-focused, oriented words, Maxine. I hope it gives you something to think about, something to engage with, and I really thank you so much for the opportunity to share a few words. Thank you.
So the action words that I'm taking from Doug are this. I think the next time I'm standing in the grocery lineup, I'm going to turn to the person beside me and say, I was at this conference last week and we were talking about the treaties right in this territory. Did you know about those? And just see what kind of a conversation I can get going. I think that that's something that it's pretty easy to do. I think we can do it. We can practice. Anyways, it's time to hear from you. And there are a couple of microphones there. And so if you have any comments or questions, I invite you to come up now. And if for some reason you don't want your words recorded, just give me a signal and we can stop the recording. So if you don't have any questions or comments, I might get you to do more laughing yoga. Okay, we've got somebody coming up. 2 people. Okay, great.
Good afternoon. I don't want to dance anymore. My name is Glenn Jim. I'm Talit from in Saanich. Just want to thank the panel. I'd like to thank the Snuneymuxw community as well, our elders here, representatives of the various communities, the leaders. I didn't get to say this yesterday, but I also want to acknowledge some of the older leaders that were here, may still be around today as well. Chief Andy Sanupin, some of the other elders that are here as well. Thank you. Anyway, I'm feeling so rude, my back to the audience, but I guess that's the protocol of the institution, so here I am. Anyway, as I said yesterday, and Maxine, you just alluded to it, the tools, the energy, the things that many of you have spent your careers focusing on, these treaties, these documents. One of the things that intrigues me and bothers me as well is the fact that, again, where do we go from here? And Doug, you coordinating with VIU this opportunity here, and I applaud you for that, and again, thank you. One of the things that some of the younger leaders that I've chatted with over the last 2 days and previous to that is, yeah, we have these tools, we can carry a big stick, but we just need to know how to use that big stick now. I want to share a story very quickly. My late uncle, my mom's brother, Gabriel Jack, he passed away last summer. And I used to spend time with him growing up and in the last few years. And he'd always talk to me and tell me stories of his day growing up. And he was born in the 1920s. So he had experience a lot of negative and very difficult times. And, you know, he always talked about the Indian agent. Now, when you talk about the Indian agent and you use that term, very negative thoughts come into your mind, I'm sure. You know, the Indian agent came in to write you a pass to get off the reserve. They came in and took your children away. They came in and told you how to live. And unfortunately, those Indian agents are still alive and well in our communities, and they come regularly. They still come in and take our children. They still come in and tell us how many fish we can take. Mind you, they work for different facets of the federal government and provincial government, but they still do. And my uncle, he used to call anyone that came into our community the Indian agents, because they still held those sticks, and they would use those sticks in a metaphorical way, you know, still force themselves upon us and tell us how we live. In my community right now, we have a social worker that comes in, and even though chief and council, community members have worked together to provide a great, good plan of action for this child, this person still tells us, well, I think that it would be better if. Now, basically, he's just slapped us in the face 10 times, because he's telling us we still don't have the authority or the power or the knowledge or the ability to take care of our children. Now, what I've heard over the last couple of days tells me that we do. But how do we do that so that we can stand at our community entrance and tell that guy to go somewhere, you know, in a polite way? So those are the things that run in my head when I hear scholars, lawyers, learned people, what we've heard in the last 2 days. It's great. You know, I said this yesterday. You know, I grew up listening to old people, elders, stories from my mom about the politicians that she grew up with. And that's the other thing. You know, in relation to that, now we have, for the most part, elected leaders in our communities. We have to remember, in some of our communities, in the north and in the south as well, we have hereditary people who still have a lot of say and a lot of control over what happens. And that's not a bad thing at all, because with them come those traditions, those teachings, as Doug said earlier, our Snowayeth, our teachings. And that in itself is, can't be negated when we do talk about what do we do now, where do we go from here. We need to remember those people aside from our elected leaders. So, you know, those hereditary chiefs, those protocols that we have in our place, you mentioned some of those, you know, Doug, you know, our Shuayhuay, some of the most sacred medicine that we have. You know, those things need to be continued and shown to be alive and well in our communities. And one last point that I need to make is, you know, amongst ourselves, we've come to learn and we respect all of this knowledge that has been shared the last couple of days. And part of the issue is we need to educate, you know, not only our own people, but the general population who is affected. You know, we heard today from this panel and from other panelists that yes, it is a treaty and we've been focusing on ourselves, but the other side of the coin is the general population is the other participants in these treaties, and recognize that yes, they've benefited, definitely benefited a hell of a lot more than we have. You know, if you measure it in their terms, land, finances, all of that. But we need to start working on the education system, turn it around. What did they do to us? They attacked our children and our education system right from the very beginning. And it's what's become of us because they attacked the children. They taught the children other things that we weren't able to teach our children anymore. We can use that to some degree. Teach the children, but teach them how we know should be taught, with love and respect and kindness and all of those things. And those children will grow up with our children and possibly make a better world for all of us. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Michael Gesselbrock, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you. Amongst 1,000,001 questions that I have, I'm curious about hearing you talk about that rock at Jack's Point and the petroglyph and the ceremonies that were surrounding this rock and acknowledging the fish families, the fish relations. I'm wondering where the role of ceremony plays in treaty relations. Hearing about the wampum belts, hearing about how there was ceremony in initiating the treaty, and now we're in a state of renewing and remembering it. Where does ceremony play? And I know there's a lot of lawyers here, and there's this real legalese stuff happening, and I'm also aware of the social and the maybe a softer path, or there's many ways to acknowledge, right? And you said that in terms of dealing within the courthouses is not the way that you desire. So, and I'll stop there, but ceremony and in rejuvenating our treaties.
I don't know, is this working? Oh yeah, okay. Thank you very much for your question. It's a really important point, and it brings to mind the discussion that's taking place under the Assembly of First Nations. There's Chief Wilton Littlechild talked about the meeting that we were at a few weeks ago, and what it was a national treaty implementation strategy session for treaty nations across the country to talk together about a national strategy of finding ways to implement. And the clear direction that we've had from the elders that are participating in that process is the necessity for ceremony to always be a consistent and important part of the work and the strategy, the development. Ceremony, that petroglyph was returned back to its rightful position a few years ago. Like when I stumbled across it in the parking lot down at the Nanaimo Museum, I went home and talked to my grandmother about the fact, and talked to the elders about it, and talked to the chief and council, and so it became an initiative to return it to its rightful place. And that's important stuff. It's who we are as a people. It's our worldview and our framework of interacting with and showing respect for creation. The treaty relationship, given that it's meant to reflect something about both parties, I think needs to definitely have elements of that. On the the issue of formality and ceremony is often one. White and Bob was the litigation actually talked about that issue. Well, what are these little, the form of this document, and was it really done properly? Does it really amount to a proper treaty or not? And was there the right pomp and circumstance and ceremony? And all of that was discussed. The ceremonial aspect is meaningful on both sides of the equation. But you see some sort of disturbing developments, I think, a couple weeks ago in with the Chilcotin, in relation to the Chilcotins people's attempts to defend and protect their territory from mining. The company, there was some kind of a leaked communication, a letter from the Prosperity Mining Company to the federal government about the environmental assessment process. They were pleading for the federal government to demand that there would be no praying and no singing of Aboriginal peoples in the environmental assessment process to determine the environmental validity of the mine. It's shocking. You know, it's kind of like it's like that ugly thing of saying you don't even exist as a people. And similarly, it's like it reminds me. That reminded me of the Justice McEachran's approach to the testimony of the elders from the Gitxsan world, who their laws, their very laws and their constitutions are encoded and embedded in important rituals and ceremonies and songs. So the lawyers for the Gitxsan people said, we need to bring in the elders to sing to you, Judge. Justice McEachran, you need to hear these songs because those are the laws of our people. He expressed tremendous judicial frustration. This is so unusual. Judicial embarrassment, I think, was the term. I was embarrassed judicially to have this old lady in front of me singing some song. He said, you should know I have a tin ear. I can't hear the melody. It doesn't sound nice to me. And then he utterly and completely rejected all of that evidence in his ugly decision, which thankfully the Supreme Court of Canada corrected. But I think it's an important, that's all part and parcel of who we are as peoples. And we need to maintain who we are as peoples in our relations together. So thank you for your question.
Welcome. Just last one point. When you brought up that it's Victoria Day, or in Nanaimo they call it Empire Day still, maybe it could be Treaty Days, where we get popularly informed about that.
Well, that does bring to mind, in my mind, June 21st, which is National Aboriginal Day. And I know the Cowichan and the Hull Community Treaty Group, and I'm sure many other First Nations on the island have done great celebrations on those days where they've invited the public, and there have been fantastic dialogues happen at those events. We don't have it as a holiday yet. Maybe the people in the legislature will think about yet another holiday in June, which would be helpful. But this is another opportunity for that kind of renewal of relationships.
Or maybe instead of Family Day. Chief Wilson.
Rupert Wilson here. I'm from Kwagyoth Nation, and we've got about a dozen of our band members here, that council, economic development, all that. We're all sitting down here. I'd like to thank you, Doug, for bringing us together. And all the years I've been in politics, I've been in it for about 45 years of my life. I'm a guy that says I'm not a quitter. But anyway, it makes me feel real good. All the years that I've been, I felt like I was handcuffed all the time, in shackles. But today, it's coming off because of all the good things that were said today. I know it's going to come off now, because the feeling is good, and I know that we have to work together. We have to form an alliance and get together and do things and wake the government up. And if there's any government official here, I think you have to know that there's a lot of power in regard backing our people up. We're waking up, and we're going to start doing things. And that's because of you, Doug. I think we're going to do a lot. Thank you.
That's good to see you.
Hi, my name is Tara Thurber, and I'm with CHLY 101.7 FM, the campus and community radio station. I first would just like to thank everyone for putting this together, Snuneymuxw and Doug and the campus. It's been an invaluable learning experience for me, which is why I would like to take off my journalistic cap for a second and just say personally, it's I really learned a lot about living treaties today, which was, I think, really valuable. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I understand now that they're living, one, because they still exist, and two, because of their connection to the land, and because they're always going to be changing, like appropriately with as the land and the needs of the land and the people that live on it change. So if I'm wrong, maybe somebody can add to that or clarify that, but that's what I'm going to take away. Secondly, I'd like to put my journalistic hat back on because Maxine is putting out the call for action, and I just want to say that we are a campus and community radio station that would actually really, really like to host an Aboriginal issues show on a regular basis, and don't have anybody there that would necessarily be the appropriate chair. So we're really interested. There's people there that are willing to train you and offer you any sort of support and using those services. It's a free radio station. It's yours. Come and use it. And we would love to get engaged and help educate the public further on this and to take the energy that you guys have put into this and make it go a little further for your time. So thank you very much.
Okay, I think this is our last question or comment, because then we're going to take a little break and get ready for the closing. Okay?
Aitsquitchel, Hela, Siamna, Shelicha, Chasea, let Kolatham just good day, everybody. And I just wanted to get up and thank Colossalton for coordinating this on behalf of Hochstrasse First Nation. So we're ready to move, and like the meeting we had last week down in Sarlip, we were very inspired after that meeting. And this 2 days was very stimulating for us, for our Lands Committee. And I just wanted to talk about one thing, and it's a bit of a question as well, but I wanted to say that since the Sanishan Bay Marina, we've been able to basically say no to any kind of development along the foreshores, like marinas, those kind of things. So, because it's an infringement of our rights. So, in relations to lands, tying into the land, so like every time there's a sale of a house in our traditional territory, it's an agreement to basically continue to infringe on our traditional territory and our rights to hunt and fish. So, is there a possibility that we can challenge these sales of lands in the same way that we challenged developments in our waters?
There's it's not a simple matter. You know, I talked about the complexity of implementing our land rights is one of the most challenging issues given, I mean, the Stanemo and Sartlip, we share hyper-urban environments around us. And, you know, I don't think there's any question at all that there is a cloud hanging over the title that the provincial government has claimed to have granted, inconsistent with the treaties from the 1850s. The province in the constitutional framework of Canada, under Section 109, they only have their interest in the land subject to the terms of any other pre-existing rights or interests, which includes the Douglas Treaty recognition of our Aboriginal title. How that would play out today, and what does that mean about, you know, all of the people that hold fee simples and have been operating for 100+ years in those areas, is a complicated question, and one where I don't think there's a clear answer. But I think it's going to require us talking together to sort out how that plays out.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really thinking about in terms of like stopping a land sale. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking in terms of you know, possibly like today, for instance, we can approach a marina development in our traditional territory and enter into an agreement with them, benefits agreement or something like that. I'm just like thinking, every time there's a land sale, there's a tax that's involved with it. You know, I think that we should be able to affect that tax. Again, I just wanted to say hi to you, Colossalton, for coordinating this, and I know Chief Morris asked me to send his regrets that he couldn't be here. Okay, hi,
Hi,
Tiffany? Sorry, looks like, yeah, I think we, yeah,
Could I just take a quick moment?
okay.
Okay. My name is Paul Manley. I'm one of the chapter representatives for the Council of Canadians. We're a 76,000 member organization in Canada. We've got about 2,000 members locally. And in this crowd, I can see a few members that are active in our chapter. We get involved, the Council of Canadians gets involved in solidarity with First Nations across Canada and around the world with their struggles with resource extraction, water rights, all those kind of things. So we're involved with Jackie Thomas with the Yinki Dene. We're involved in Chicolton with the Prosperity Mine, with those struggles. And I would just like to ask what you would like to see. We don't do anything without getting guidance from First Nations when it comes to your struggles, but we would like to ask what you would like to see in terms of solidarity with the struggle. I know that there's issues about water licensing and water rights, and after listening at this conference, I understand that that's part of your treaty right. And so I would like to ask, what kind of things you would like to see done in solidarity from the people that share this territory with you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate so much the engagement between Snuneymuxw and non-Snuneymuxw people's organizations. I mean, in terms of, I don't even, in my heart, in a sense, I'm not even looking for people to line up and advocate and fight with us. What I'm looking for, and the idea behind this conference, is the simple gesture of recognition of the issues between us. And as I open this conference, the recognition that we matter to each other and we have things to talk about. And we should create spaces for that. That we need to collectively work out our future together. And I know that will take shape in many different ways. And I admire the work of your organization and encourage you to continue to engage with Indigenous peoples and other groups in the country on important public policy matters. It's this is the stuff that changes society. Is members of society caring and putting in effort and time to create a different future. What's that beautiful quote from Margaret Mead about?
Yeah, I never doubt the ability of a group of small group of people to change the world, because nothing else ever has.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful quote, and I really believe in that. And so, so I would just thank you for your engagement with Indigenous peoples and support. And I think that over time, when we see, I really, speaking for myself, I really see the federal government, their recent decisions in relation to environmental assessment processes, stripping out the relevance of those processes, blocking the participation in those processes of organizations like yourselves, saying that, the Council of Canadians has no right to stand in front of the National Energy Board on Enbridge because you're not directly impacted. You have no direct stake as an organization to have a voice. I'm not saying that they've said that specifically about the Council of Canadians, but for different environmental groups, it seems like that's what they're trying to say. Likewise, they're stripping the power of the National Energy Board and bringing it into cabinet itself. I think that over time, and I shared this yesterday in this panel, I think that Canadians will start to see Aboriginal rights and treaty rights, Aboriginal title, as being a last bastion of protecting the shared environmental values of all Canadians. In terms of protecting our spaces from a project like Enbridge that Canada, the national government of Canada, seems hell-bent on pushing forward to open up, to send Alberta oil to the east. And so I think there's going to be, over time, this year and the next year, there's going to be a recognition of that alignment and the importance of Indigenous peoples in protecting Canadian values. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, at this time, I'd like to thank Chief Doug White and, sorry. Okay, last word.
Gela Kesla, Nugo Am Yakawilas, Euclin Lach Chachis, Euclin Sach Quagil, Gela Keslas, Nenemo, Goga Potlin, Yakin Das, Nanwakola. Thank you for allowing us to gather in your territory. My name is Yakawilas, it means place where property comes from. I share some of those same commonalities, Doug, that you're sharing around having our big house laws and breathing life back into our systems and sharing them in a more broader environment that kind of ripples out to become lessons to who we have to be working with, such as government and, in ourselves. Maxine, you were sharing some of those pieces of, not feeling it outside of the big house, and how do we get ourselves engulfed in that mind frame of becoming one. I'm really thankful for the past few days because I think it's traveling with our hereditary chiefs has been a really cool experience for me because they were here with us the past few days. We had Chief Peter Knox, Chief George Hunt. We have Nick Hoppenkim up here as well. Peter Knox's name is Oaxtach Wilgalis Wallace Namuguis. He was a signatory to both treaties that were up in our nation. He said, how can we talk about enclosed fields when I was gifted a mountain through my marriage? Wow. So it's triggered a lot of in-depth, wonderful discussions, and I hope that we could carry on and link. Talking with Glenn and talking with a few of the other chiefs, like there's a lot of energy as we're walking up and down the stairs together of like, how can we immediately get together? How can we immediately make that commitment right now to meet and talk about what our priorities are? And just, it's more of an excitement, it's a chance to link arms even with our administration that has been participating here. Like we're talking to your referrals officer the other day, and just kind of like the commonalities of the stresses that we're all kind of facing around tenure and private and logging, fisheries, all of those, what we get tasked with, what our leadership gets tasked with, that we all need that help and that capacity to be able to grow. There is some government officials in the room that we're sitting across the tables doing negotiations with that are in this room right now. And there's so many wonderful things that we could be doing together. And I just want to say thank you. But as well too, like, let's announce some form of commitment. Let's meet outside the door in half an hour and discuss how we can make this happen. Like, that's how exciting this really feels right now. And I commend you for all of the wonderful people that you've brought to us, because, learning about Treaty 8 atmospheres, learning about the UN Declaration, man, like those are some really wonderful tools, and our nation's been trying to utilize them. And, we've been taught through different avenues of like maybe utilizing like UBCIC and Summit to kind of, create resolutions that stack those tools together. And I think with us joining, we could really learn as Douglas Treaty nations how to stack our tools together. And we want that, and we're really hungry for it. And, let's create a time and let's continue this. Let's create the momentum. The momentum's already started. It's just a matter of allowing us to flow and hop on that canoe together and start pulling. Anyways, Gila Kesla, thank you very much. Hopefully you make an announcement.
Thank you for your perfect closing words, and please join me in thanking Chief Doug White, Justice Harry Slade, Dr. Brian Tom, and Dr. Jim Miller.
I would like to call Councillor Emmy Manson. Dr. Jim Miller? Yes. Come on up.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Dr. Brian Tom. Mr. Justice Harry Slade.
Oh, thank you, thanks.
And of course, our excellent moderator, Maxine Madelpy. Thank you. You're fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you.